Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the Friday Five. And today I'm going to talk to you about my favorite verse in the Bible. I say that tongue in cheek, and I always do, because a lot of people will ask me questions that I may or may not know the answer to. And I've often told them my favorite verse in the Bible is Deuteronomy 29:29, where Moses tells the people, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of the law. Moses was encouraging the people at this time to obey, to adopt, accept, and obey the covenant that God had given them. They were about to go into a new land, and they needed to do what God told them to do. And He gives them all of the blessings that will happen if they do, all of the bad things that will happen if they don't. But He wanted to remind them that God didn't tell them everything. And that's one of the reasons that I say, at least partially seriously, that this is my favorite verse of the Bible, because it reminds me I don't know everything. There are a lot of things that happen in the world. There are a lot of questions people will ask me about the Bible that I simply don't know the answers to. And some things God has just chosen not to tell us. And that's okay, because He's God and I'm not. So He reminds us that He is in control, and He reminds us that He has told us the things that we need to know. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul tells us that the Spirit of God has searched the deep things of God, the very mind of God, and has revealed these things to us. And so God tells us the things that He wants us to know, that we need to know, and that He wants us to follow, so that we can be more like Him. Now, some people would object to that and say, well, that's not fair. He needs to tell us everything. But remember again, He's God and we are not. So, this verse also reminds me that I need to trust God, because God is so infinitely wiser than I am and knows so many more things. I heard somebody describe a number of years ago that God sees the entire universe and all of time like a parenthesis in a sentence. We are looking from the inside of the parenthesis out. God's looking from the outside of the parenthesis in. He knows what's on either end of it, and He knows the ins and outs. He created the entire universe, so He knows many things about it that you and I will never know. So we're going to have to realize that He is much wiser, much smarter, much more intelligent than we are, and there are some things that He knows that we just don't need to know. Even just before He was betrayed and His crucifixion, Jesus told His disciples that there were some things He wanted to tell them, but they weren't ready to hear them. You ever been there? Some things you might have wanted to know, needed to know, but at that moment in time, you weren't ready to hear those things. Or maybe your children or someone you love. You knew there were some things they needed to be aware of, some things they needed to be told, but they just weren't ready. So it is with you and I. There are sometimes we just don't need to know certain things, and very often in our entire life we don't need to know things. And so God has chosen to reveal to us the things that we need to know. So I'm not God, but I need to trust God. And one more thought on that, God's given us everything we need to trust Him. The writer of the book of Hebrews tells us that faith is the evidence of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. God doesn't expect us to check our brain at the door and just accept Him blindly. But He's given us reasons, He's given us cause to know Him, to trust Him, and to follow Him, even though we may not have all of the information. He does, and we can trust Him. Now, the rest of the verse tells the people that God has given them these things. He's told them the things that He has told them so that they can do all of the words of the law. In other words, God doesn't expect me to be God. He doesn't expect me to know everything. He doesn't expect me to know all things. And He understands the limitations that I have as a human being. Isn't this a wonderful verse to remind us of how limited we are, but how infinite our God is, and how much we can trust Him with the everyday things of our life? Deuteronomy 29:29. Think about it a moment. Read over it. Pray over it. It just might turn out to be your favorite verse as well. Thanks for joining me for the Friday Five.